principles did not die, they were not unelected. If you believed in love on Monday, you ought to still believe in love today, because love and truth are more powerful and more redemptive. This is not the time for the politics and playing games with the lives of the most vulnerable. This is a time for statesmen and stateswomen, not merely partisan politics. And to the children, be better than what you've seen this year. Don't be racist. Don't be bullies. Don't be haters. And to the faithful, we cannot mourn forever. We must challenge this nation until the day comes that we are one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let me just say good morning, and first of all, I'll take a pause and ask, just as we continue to pray for people out in the West who are suffering from the extreme forest fires, and certainly for the families in Chattanooga, Tennessee this morning. This should be heavy on our minds, and the stress is even in the Durham community now over the shooting that has occurred. On November the 28th, this coming Monday, at 5:30 p.m. on the grounds of the state capitol. The Forward Together Monday movement, the NAACP, and all of our coalition partners will have a mass tomorrow Monday. The theme of it will be no fear, no hatred, and no stealing our votes and stealing this election. We're asking people to come of all different races, creeds, colors, and political persuasions who believe in the fundamentals of our democracy and who believe our democracy will be one of justice and domestic tranquility and not one of injustice and constant division. We call on the governor, and we have developed a special online letter and petition, not to try to throw this election into the legislature and to pledge that he will not do so. We also call on him to pledge not to lead an effort, he or the legislators, to stack the Supreme Court without going through the voters by using a legislative maneuver because they are not happy with the outcome of the election. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Amen.
The same party that the governor represents is telling people across this nation to accept the elections. And people are just protesting. They're not even calling for a new election. They're simply protesting. But we have to ask the question, what in the world is going on in North Carolina? Is this what democracy is supposed to look like?
Wow.
When you are the governor of a state, by becoming governor, you control pretty much the membership of the State Board of Election. The state board, the local county boards are members of your party. The election is over and you lose, but you continue to claim voter fraud, and you misinterpret to the public a normal process called canvassing that happens every election year, where complaints come and they're vetted by the local and they're found to be true or not. A complaint is not voter fraud. It is a complaint. And the NAACP and our Forward Together moral partners have never stood against the process of canvassing. We always have canvassing. That's a part and part of the system. But the attempt to malign people, to claim fraud because there is a complaint, is the same kind of bogus stuff that the governor, that the members of the legislature did when they claimed the need for HB 589, the voter suppression bill. They claimed that there were all these cases of fraud, which was fraudulent in and of itself.
Right.
They claimed that there were all of these people voting that weren't supposed to be voting, which when their claims were placed not under the light of political rhetoric, but under the light of the Constitution and the courts, they were all found to be flawed and faulty and a distortion of the truth. One other thing we see today is now Civitas, this group that has done everything it could to undermine voting in North Carolina and lost. The public should never forget that. They were behind the redistricting plans. When those plans were examined under the courts found them unconstitutional. They were part of the council with the Republican extremist-led legislature and the governor are behind HB 589. But when it went to the courts, it was found unconstitutional. They've tried, now they're trying again to say let's hold up the count of the election because of same-day registration. They've never liked same-day registration and early voting because in the real sense, they don't like people voting because they know if the full public votes, their narrow-minded agenda that they push will probably not get a good hearing in the public square. And so we question deeply this cynical strategy to try to delay the results and the voice of the people simply because one party is not satisfied with those results. This kind of slander and unsubstantiated claims being made by the McCrory campaign and others in North Carolina is not negligible. The impact is real. When slanderous accusations are made in public against voters and civic engagement groups, it can have a chilling effect on voters and civic engagement participation. The games that our governor, his tacticians, his party, and the legislature are playing must end now. To mess with the right to vote, and when the people have spoken, is a dangerous thing in a democracy. We have had to deal with not being happy with the outcome of the vote, but we had to adjust to it and then move our tactics from election processes to governing and challenging those who are elected. Pat McCrory and the General Assembly spent nearly 4 years and nearly $6 million of our money defending an unconstitutional bill. It's time for the games with the right to vote to end. Because of Pat McCrory refusing to address the issue during the flood and call for extending voting hours and more early voting places doing early voting in areas that were flooded, many voters did not have the kind of accommodations we believe they should have had dealing with this devastating ordeal. That was, we believe, fraud and suppression. And it's time for the games with the right to vote to end. When North Carolina cut more than 158 early voting sites, made 158 less than we had in 2012, 2016. And for instance, in Guilford County, went from 16 early voting sites in 2012 to 1 in 2016. Voters there are over 30% African American. And the statistics show us that the first week of early voting in 2012, over 60,000 voters voted, but this year, under 7,000. That's the kind of voter fraud and voter suppression we ought to be dealing with. And it's time for the games with the right to vote to end. When Dallas Woodhouse, the chairman, party chairman of the Republican Party, sent a memo to all the Republican members of the boards of election and instructed them to make party line decisions and not decisions that were in line with what the court said and the Constitution, our governor was silent. The State Board of Election was silent, but that was voter fraud. And that was suppression. And it's time now for the game being played with our vote to end. When black voters from African American churches in Chatham County, and along with white people, organized the Moral March to the Poll, and they were subjected to KKK and white power and swastika signs painted on the street leading to the church, trying to discourage and incite fear. That's voter fraud. That's voter suppression. That's what we ought to be dealing with. But these other things, it's time for playing with the right to vote, the games to end. When, lastly, the State Board of Election did not reopen some early voting and election day sites on HBCU's campuses. As hard as students fought for the right to vote. But in this election, you shut down the election polling places on HBCU campuses in some places. That's suppression. We didn't hear a word from the governor. We didn't hear a word from the State Board. It's time for these attacks to end. Lastly, I want to stand and call up my friend Bob Hall. Pat McCrory's attempt to discredit and pollute an election by filing over 50 desperate and unjustified protests is beneath the office of a sitting governor and beneath the values of our democracy. And the games must end now. Governor, make a pledge that you will accept the results of this election. Make a pledge that you will not try to throw this election into the legislature. Make a pledge that you will not try to stack the Supreme Court and expand its numbers in a way that it hadn't been expanded since 1936. And even during all that time, all that Jim Crow, we in the civil rights community never called for it to expand. We've never questioned the right to vote of other people. We've only wanted a fair and even playing ground and access to the right to vote. Because we make this pledge. We make this pledge. We will fight with everything we have, morally and legally, against any attempt to steal our votes and to steal elections. No fear, no hate, no stealing of these elections. And to the media, take a look. All of these protests, many of them are already being found to be bogus by the local boards of election. Corey's campaign is trying to get around it, trying to have all kinds of last-ditch efforts. Even tried, the very people who always talk about local control, tried to take local control away from the local boards of election. Right. This is what we're dealing with. And it's time for this foolishness and these games to stop going into Thanksgiving in December. Accept the results of the election, and let's move on. If we want to battle, let's battle next year over legislative issues. Let's battle over policies. But the election is over, and it's time for the games to stop. Bob Hall.
All right. My name is Bob Hall. I'm the Executive Director of Democracy North Carolina. We've deployed volunteers to the various canvass operations in the counties and looked at these protests that the governor and the Republicans have filed. They're nonsense. They are maligning people. If you take them all together, we just did an exam of all of the cases where somebody is being accused of being a felon and voting. They're serving a felon sentence on probation. They go to the polls and they vote. There are 43 cases. The governor makes it sound like there are thousands and thousands of cases of fraud. The entire universe of all the protests together, if you leave out the Bladen County situation, it's less than 110 total votes that are being challenged by his people across the state. 43 of them involve these accusations. We went through all 43. There are 5 people who are completely erroneously identified, slandered, if you will, defamed. Their names are being put out in the public sphere as being accused of being felons who illegally voted. They're being accused of a crime. There are more than a dozen others who are serving misdemeanors. They were convicted of a misdemeanor. They're on probation. It's not hard to find this out. All they had to do was look up in the Department of Public Safety records. And people are not serving a felony sentence. It's clearly marked that they are serving a misdemeanor. In North Carolina, you do not lose your right to vote when you're convicted of a misdemeanor. And that's what they did. They went to vote. They are being maligned. They are being slandered, being accused of being criminals and committing criminal acts. The good news is that the Republican-led local boards of elections are dismissing these complaints. The bad news is that McCrory continues to talk about fraud as though there's some sweeping problem with our election system. This is his legacy, his final act, to be lying, to be cheating, to be attempting to steal an election. Shame on him. This is his legacy, to be lying, to be trying to cheat, to be trying to steal an election. Shame on him.
Thank you, Bob. This is serious business. And finally, for us, you know, people have talked a lot about the loudness of Trump and how he maligned people loudly. Well, there's something worse than loud maligning. It's quiet, loosing lawyers, loosing people to file bogus complaints, and with a smile, you are still engaged in attacks that are undemocratic, that are felonious, that are lies, and that undermine the right to vote, and in many ways also are race-based and class. When you look at Bladen County, for instance, all the people who were attacked were African Americans around those cases, and many of the complaints that we're seeing, the high numbers of African Americans in the small numbers that are being challenged, the high numbers in the small numbers. So we asked the media to get the word out. We'll take questions now. Remember that this is the same group that lied about voter fraud when they passed House Bill 589, and that was proven to be a lie in the courts. This is the same group that lied and said they were following the Voting Rights Act when they did the redistricting plans that now the court said is actually a violation of the Voting Rights Act. So you cannot look at these two positions, the position of the NAACP, Democracy, North Carolina, and our allies, and theirs as being equal. They've been proven liars, proven distorters, proven voter suppressors, and been proven to try to use fraudulent evidence or fraudulent accusations, if you will, to make and build a fraudulent case against the right to vote. And it's time that it stops now. Any questions from members of the media or our attorneys? November 28th, Monday, 5:30, all people are invited of goodwill to join us. Yes, sir.
Just a question, in addition to the voting issues, but also the shooting yesterday here in Durham. What's your take on that shooting and the response from the community who say this could impact the community policing relationship they're trying to build?
Well, I don't want to make a lot of comment about that. I'm literally just getting back in town. And in this particular press, we're always deeply concerned about shootings and unarmed. I don't know the whole story behind the shooting. It certainly is an issue nationally and locally that we've got to deal with. And if I would say in light of this whole voting issues, which is why we need to be moving forward, remember we have asked the current state government, legislature, governor, to address these issues. We actually live in a state where the governor and legislature supported laws that made it easier to get a gun than it is to vote. We live in a state where we've had situations of killing in Charlotte and other places where our governor, for instance, called people looters and rioters when the minority of the folks, a small minority of those people, may have done some bad thing, but the majority of the people were peaceful protesters who simply wanted the truth, wanted open, fair, free, transparent investigation. Because the bottom line, until you have truth and transparency, you'll never have trust. So I don't want to speak. I'm just going to get briefed this morning. I'm literally walking back in the office early this morning, just got back 1 o'clock last night. And so it is our policy that we don't speak on issues until we're clear. But on this issue of voting, it's time for this governor to stop trying to shoot this election and destroy this election. It's time for this governor to stop playing games and trying to undermine the rights of the people. It's time for this governor to stop trying to kill the results of this election. And it's time for North Carolina to move forward. Thank you so much. Take care.